I'm going to bring Gary Wayne on with us. He's going to do a follow-up to the show that we did last night on the fall of Lucifer. And tonight we're going to be covering the Books of Enoch and speaking about him as a prophet. Gary, are you there, brother?
I am here.
All right, excellent. Well, we didn't lose that much time, so we should be able to cover a lot of information. And so I was just telling the listening audience that we did cover the fall of Lucifer last night, and just the whole story of the war in heaven and the pre-Adamic times, all of that. But this evening we're going to speak about the Books of Enoch and anything else of interest that you'd like to talk about. But if you would, can you give out your website and contact information, and also where people can go to find and support your work?
Sure. Most people can get a hold of me on Facebook under Gary Wayne, and I have some Genesis 6 conspiracy pages, and also a group, Gary Wayne, the Genesis 6 conspiracy. I do a weekly blog that most people find interesting. And I post all of my interviews on my site and on my group as well. You can also get a hold of me through Twitter at Gary Wayne63, at Gary Wayne63. My website is the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6, conspiracy.com. And on there, I've got a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters and connections to Barnes & Noble and Kindle and Amazon.com if you're interested. And you can also contact me through my website as well, through the email access. So lots of ways to get a hold of me. And if you do ask me a question, I will get back to you.
Excellent. And if you would, can you tell those that don't know a little bit about your upcoming endeavors and the books you'll be releasing soon? Well, hopefully.
Yeah, the book, hopefully soon. Yeah, I need to get at it. You need to get serious again on it. The book I'm working on, and I'm well into it, is about the second Exodus, as I like to call it, and likely going to call it Covenants, Curses, and Commitments. It's about the Holy Covenant, the curses, and the blessings out of the covenant, how the covenant has been fulfilled through the curses because of the violations against the covenant, and that how Israel will awaken in the end time and will be led in Exodus with Judah in the last 3.5 years of this age. So I'm going to try and bring all of that together, and also include some material on the lost tribes of Israel as well.
Excellent. Well, with regard to the topic that we were covering last night about the fall of Lucifer, the war in heaven, and the exile of the rebel angels down here to the earth, was there anything else that you wanted to bring up or bring forward before we move into the topic of Enoch and the Books of Enoch?
Yeah, really, I think we covered a lot of extensive detail on it. The one aspect in terms of the relationship between Jesus and Lucifer, in terms of people think of Lucifer as the morning star, and also Jesus is called the morning star. We did not cover that often. That's why I prefer the translation in Isaiah 14:12 as Hail El, son of the dawn, because he's the son of the morning, where Jesus is clearly called in Revelations the morning star. So I think that if that was just translated as it should be, I think then there's absolutely no confusion. And then there is another aspect where Lucifer, or Satan, was likely the minister and highest, most powerful angel before his fall, before the throne, and that through the Melchizedek order, Jesus will become that eternal priest, as it's talked about in Hebrews, that replaces eventually, as being part man and part God through Jesus, who will live eternally, as it explains in Hebrews, to, I think, replace the position that Satan once held as Hail El, in probably the most powerful angel that was ever created. And what's interesting is also in Hebrews, it says that Melchizedek was like and similar to Jesus, and also that he was no beginning and no end, like the Alpha Omega, and that he has no genealogy. And so I wonder whether or not it was actually a pre-Jesus, a word incarnate that presented himself as Melchizedek to bless Abraham, who was going to create Israel, who is going to produce the Messiah, Jesus, down the road. It would be so appropriate, being Alpha Omega, and that Melchizedek does not have a genealogy listed in the Old Testament and says there is no genealogy for them in the New Testament. So we did not get a chance to get into that in detail, but that's kind of the quick summary. That I think that's a sort of a denouement of the minister aspect that Satan likely once held within. And we also covered last night that he has the 9 jewels for his breastplate, like the Aaronite priests have 12, and a number of other things. So that would be about the only thing that I thought that we didn't quite get into, but I think we gave so much information that I don't think anybody walked away disappointed.
No, I think everybody will be greatly blessed by that show, because we covered that topic in very thorough manner, probably more so than people are going to find on any one program anywhere. What about, because there is mention of Melchizedek also in the work of Enoch, so would you want to comment there as we move into this particular topic?
Well, yeah, and I think, when we get into the different books of Enoch, Enoch has a number of sort of incarnations in through the various books. So, I think let's just leave that until we get into that a little bit further, because I'm not quite sure which direction that we're going to go with that.
Okay, well, let me start with this. As far as the books of Enoch, what are your feelings on the 3 that are available, and also why do you think that it is and was not included with canon? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the issue gets to be, in terms of books that are going to be put into the canon, they have to establish the authorship of the gospel, and they also have to ensure that it has congruency and hasn't been corrupted in any sort of way or fashion with what the Bible says. And I think those are the 2 issues, and which is kind of the root to the meaning of Apocrypha, which is why they're put in there, doubted authority or unknown authority or unknown authors. So those get to be the issues, and to varying degrees, each of them have some issues that are not completely congruent with the Bible. So I think that's really gets down to it. And I'll also add that I think you're referring to First Enoch, Second Enoch, and Third Enoch, right. And then there's also the Book of Giants, and then there's also the Enochian Book of Giants that the Book of King Og descends out of. So there's a whole series of those books, and I think First Enoch runs very, very close with Scripture, but it has a few issues in there that just doesn't make any sense. But it runs, like I say, 99% true with Scripture. But I think there's been a few corruptions in there, and again, it's establishing who wrote it. Was it several authors, or was it one author? And when people always say, well, what corruptions might you be talking about in First Enoch? Just little things like in verse 61, and I'm referring to the R.H. Charles version of this as opposed to Alexander Bruce, although they're one close, and also the Giaz version as opposed to the Aramaic version, because the Giaz is a little bit longer and has a few more verses. So that's why sometimes the verses don't always match up. But in chapter 60, for example, it says Enoch is 550 years old. And of course, that makes no sense, right? Because we know he was taken to heaven at 365 years old. And right. In chapter 58, he says he's 500 years old. So there's some little things like that, and a couple other things like it has the angels building the ark, which we know Noah built the ark according to the Bible. So I wonder whether or not Alexander Bruce had his fingers on some of this or not, because he was a Gnostic and a Freemason and a descendant of Robert the Bruce. And I'm just wondering whether or not he may have put a couple of corruptions in there from the Gnostic perspective. So so I would say on First Enoch, like 99%, I mean, it's very hard to pick holes in that. Second Enoch has a few more problems in it. For example, in Second Enoch, it has, the gods of the seven heavens, and they're using Greek names of gods in there. So they've got names like Kronos and Aphrodite and Ares and Zeus and Hermes. So there's been some corruptions done in that one as well. So, and it's got a few other things, and it is less congruent with the Bible than First Enoch. And then Third Enoch, it kind of goes more off stream in terms of how it deals with Enoch as being Metatron and raised to an angel, and an angel with 6 wings, and an angel above all other angels. So it has, I kind of question that, and to a messianic figure like Jesus, he almost becomes Jesus, having a throne in the 7th hall or the 7th heaven that God provides for him. So it's interesting how all of them have these little things that you just can't sort of reconcile with the Bible in them. But in between those issues, there's a ton of fabulous information. Absolutely. And the reason why you have to understand about does it run with the Bible is because you have to understand there were 2 Enochs. And if it doesn't run congruent in the Bible, like in 1,000 different ways, for example, it's probably written by Enoch, son of Cain, as opposed to Enoch, son of Jared. But if it's just a few corruptions, that can happen through time with people just corrupting it because of their polytheist beliefs, right? So that's why I think you have to be very, very careful when we get beyond First Enoch with the other ones, to use them more for context and information. And I know a lot of people won't like this when I say I think you can rely on First Enoch, except for those very minor issues, to be a good parallel scripture with the Bible. And many of the church fathers quoted from it and thought it was accurate as well. So just a quick synopsis on my thoughts on it. And of course, the Book of Giants goes a little bit further away, and it has other informations, that's in it. And we can get into all of those on an individual basis if you want. But when you get into like the Book of Giants out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you've got interesting things in there like Gilgamesh's name in there on 4Q531, for example. So it's got some interesting things as well. And there's not a whole bunch to the surviving parts of the Book of Giants, which is unfortunate.
Right. Yeah, I do love those 2 accounts, and it is a shame that they're so fragmented. But just so people know, we compiled a book of the works of Enoch, and there are a couple of other texts that not a lot of people know about that we included within even what you had made mention of with those particular books. But in the one that we compiled, the works of Enoch, we have the account of Enoch the prophet, which is a Greek text that was found in 2006. The Book of Jubilees, chapter 3 and 4, where it speaks about Enoch, and the Book of Enoch, of course, book 1, the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, which is the second one, the Slavonic, the Aramaic Dead Sea Scroll fragmentary, First Enoch, Ogdius the Giant, which is the Book of the Giants, and then the Mandean Book of the Giants, then the Midrash of Semyaza and Aza, the Kebra Nagas, chapter 100, which is all about the fall of the Watchers, and expounding upon Genesis 6, which I do believe the Book of Enoch gives us greater detail on that than any other text. Then there's the Armenian vision of Enoch the Just, the third book of Enoch, which is the Hebrew, which we are speaking about. There's also the Coptic Apocryphon of Enoch. And then there's the Slavonic two tablets of Enoch. And a lot of these, again, are, texts that not a lot of people know about. And because, you know, as far as compiling all together, the study of all of these texts, I believe, gives us greater detail on what occurred in Genesis 6 with the sons of God mating with the daughters of Cain, and giving us a greater detail into that particular aspect. Because I know, for people that first read the Bible, and when I began to revisit and reread all of these texts, when I came to that particular passage, it was one of the things that intrigued me to begin the study of the extra biblical material. And then the other aspect of the Book of Enoch, which I found so fascinating, was the mention of both, um, Christ and the Ancient of Days, um, and the references, the messianic prophecies that were contained within these particular scriptures, and even the whole. We're already at first break. All right, we'll be right back, everyone. And everything. But welcome back, and we appreciate all of you. And I just wanted to let you know that the index that I had read from is from the book that we put together called The Collected Works of Enoch. And I'll be sure to send that to you too, Gary, so you can check out those other texts that I made mention of. They're pretty interesting. But with regard to Enoch, as far as the messianic prophecies, in my opinion, because I believe that the Council of Nicaea and some of these other councils, that um, they may have had more of an interest in keeping truth from the masses, and that collectively, the children of Cain, the seed of the serpent, and the various church authorities, that they have always had that as intention, to keep truth from the masses and keep us in the dark with regard to knowledge, especially anything that has to do with the prophecies of the coming of Christ. And I think that that's one of the reasons why perhaps the Book of Enoch was targeted and kept, and almost eradicated completely, from public disclosure. Any comment on that, Gary?
Well, I think that's a very, very distinct possibility. And, we don't even see a copy of Enoch until about the 17th century or the 18th century, when Alexander Bruce translates the copy that they find in Ethiopia, the Kiev version. And then we get the Aramaic versions a little bit later. So it's a more recent addition into our bank of knowledge of the scriptures. And yet we have, at the time when they're putting the Bible together, and just before, you've got, people like Tertullian defending it, and you've got Clement of Alexandria quoting from it. So you have some pretty big heavyweights who believe that, the Enoch literature was part of what they called the 70 scroll hagiography that's referenced in Ezra, but it wasn't included into to the final Palestinian canon for some reason, which we don't know of, and which is why they can't probably date the copies that they have today back beyond 200 to 300 BC, which is again another reason why it sort of hits at apocryphal list. But what we don't know is was there older Hebrew copies of it that was kept by the church and locked away? Because the Vatican has these vast libraries and caverns of secrets that they've locked away, that they've been collecting for almost 2,000 years.
Right.
So it could very well be in there, because this information that is in the Bible about the antediluvian epoch and the rebellion of the angels and the giants, I mean, this is not standard doctrine that's taught in churches because there's so little on it.
Right.
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 And First Enoch has twofold purposes. One is to focus heavily on the history of the prehistory, if I can put it that way, and the other is prophetic, so that you can understand the end times through prehistory. And it's like it's that key that's been lost, and we only have perhaps part of the Book of Enoch or other missing books, because there's a lot of scholars that think that it was part of another set of books that were also lost, like the Wars of Yahweh they talk about, and of course the Book of Yasher, and of course the Yasher one doesn't seem to be at least all of the old Book of Yasher, because there's things that are missing in it that are referenced in the Bible. And it's got some issues to it as well, some significant mysticism in it that's been corrupted over the time. So we don't know about that one. There's the Toledoth of Adam and the Toledoth of Noah, that they all think what's in Enoch has parts of those books in it. So whether that's true or not, that's just what a lot of scholars kind of postulate on.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and as far as some of the scholarly and some of the opinions, I'm very careful with all of that as well, because again, I don't necessarily trust even the opinions of professional opinions of some of these things. And again, even with the Book of Enoch, I think that it's a very much older text, and that there probably are older copies that we do not have access to. And even like with the Dead Sea Scrolls, it has been mentioned, and there have been people that have given testimony as to seeing firsthand complete, full extent Aramaic copies of the Book of Enoch, and not in the Ethiopic, and going back to thousands of years, or at least as old as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which places them before um, going back several thousand years. And so it makes those particular texts very much very ancient, and it also confirms that the Book of Enoch is very ancient, but we don't have access to this material. And even with the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a lot of texts and things that were found that are still have not yet been made public, and all that has been released is all that was fragmentary, those things which are broken. And so comment on that, Gary.
Well, again, I think we have to be very, very critical in terms of the so-called experts, in terms of what their opinions are. So when I mean to be critical, we need to ask very serious critical questions and what their biases are. And one of the things that they tend to do is they look at the style of writing of certain aspects, and just like they do with the Bible throughout. And the whole, as soon as I see that, what I see is they're trying to delegitimize the credibility of it. Yes. So an example of that in terms of how they do that is they divide up the various chapters in the first book of Enoch to be written in different dates, all fairly recent dates. So they divide chapters 1 through 36 into what they call the Book of Watchers, to somewhere around 150 to 300 BC. But then they have chapters 37 to 71, and that they put that in what they call the Book of Parables. And I don't even know where they get these names from. Maybe you do, but and they date that to about 100 to 200 you know, AD. So all of a sudden now you're getting hundreds of years difference in terms of the age that they're dating parts of Enoch. And then they've got the astronomical book of luminaries, chapter 72 to 82 now, and they date that back to about 200 BC. And they have the book of dreams and visions in chapters 83 to 90, and that they date to about 150 BC. And then they have the Epistle of Enoch, chapters 91 to 108, which again goes back to about 100 to 150 AD. So they have all these various dates, and I find that quite suspicious because, you know, when I read through, and I'm no expert on the linguistic aspect, but I don't really see a significant style difference, if anything. But again, like I say, I think it's you know, more or less just how they try and delegitimize it for the reasons that we talked earlier. And then you've got some scholars that think that Enoch was first written in Aramaic, which makes no sense, because if it is old and it has this information that is just astounding throughout it, I mean, original would be in Hebrew. We may not have an original Hebrew,
exactly.
but to say it was first copied in Aramaic just makes no sense. And then people say, well, it wasn't even done first in Aramaic, even though we have Aramaic copies. They say it was first translated into Greek, which is, you know, absolutely crazy.
Right.
Yeah. So they go at it in ways that are seemingly from an expert's perspective, but it seems to have that sort of underlying aspect to it, that it's just there to delegitimize it. And it's not only from the Christian side, but sometimes from the non-Christian side as well. Right.
Yeah, and I definitely think one of the reasons why these texts are targeted is, you know, because they speak about the elect one, and they speak about Yeshua, even in what you were talking about with I call it the Animal Farm prophecies, you know, where they basically tell us the whole history of humanity in these kind of allegory, metaphorical, symbolic, with the bulls, the black bull, the red bull, the white bulls, and the children of the watchers being the asses, the elephants, and just really strange, but it covers the full history of humanity, even to Yeshua, the coming of Yeshua, the second coming, speaks of Abraham, Moses, all of the prophets and the patriarchs and their coming, and tells the history, you know, even how they would be, you know, for the 400 years of bondage in Egypt, and Moses freeing them. All these different stories are covered in the book of Enoch in that particular section, and all of that is prophetic as well. And so, in my mind, and also with the work that I've done on the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries and decrypting that material, in my opinion, it shows that there is an inspired nature to these particular texts. And no matter what the experts say, and no matter what they are trying to date or trying uh, to illegitimize these particular revelations, that they certainly are profound. And I do believe that people can be really blessed by reading, especially First Enoch, and especially if you're trying to understand better what occurred there in Genesis 6. Comment?
I agree, and I also like the use of the Son of Man in First Enoch, which is the term that Jesus used.
Most important, yes.
Now again, what's sort of contradictory about the critics is then they use that to say, well, then it was written after Jesus, but they got all these dates that are even before Jesus. So no matter what, to use that is, you know, either it was corrupted afterwards to use those terms, or is prophetic. And I think there's, as I said, I think there's some translation corruptions in there, but not large ones, and certainly nothing that I would get too concerned about with First Enoch. But understand that there are a couple of issues in there, but like I say, 99% it runs with Scripture, and it just provides so much context. It's just something that if you're interested in Genesis and before the flood, it's a must read, and if you're a prophecy buff, it's a must read.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think is very interesting with regard to the first Enoch is that he writes in chapter 1, how he's writing for the last generation, a remote generation. And then in the latter chapters, he speaks about, uh, in my opinion, the times that we are in. And we see that he speaks about, the end of days, and gives us detail as to what would be occurring during this time, as we see also revealed in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21, and also the Apocalypse of Peter and other end time tales, that a large portion of Scripture is, in my opinion, again, written for our generation, and that the study of prophecy, and also the fact that so much material is now coming to light and made available in a way that has never been as accessible or easily um, brought up for study as it is now. Even people that have had libraries and or had to go to libraries in order to study, to be able to sit on your computer in the comfort of your own home, no matter where you are in the world, just to jump on the internet and to keyword search a particular title of a particular text. And that is so amazing. And the fact that all these texts are now being published on the internet, and there's so much material that we never had access to being made available to everybody is absolutely fascinating. There was also just recently a story, the a group, I forget exactly the name of these people, but what they do is they digitize um, ancient manuscripts, and they were allowed into, I believe it was one of those Balkan countries um, near Bulgaria. Maybe I think it was Romania actually, and there was like 50 some manuscripts, Old Testament, New Testament manuscripts, ancient, that were kept safe and secure by these particular caretakers that were appointed and through the generations to watch over some of these particular texts. And now they are digitizing them and making copies of them and making them available. And so this kind of thing is happening. And so there's so much information coming to light, even with what I had read from the index, these different texts of the Book of Enoch, which the first three that we made mention of are the ones that are mostly known about. But now there are, other fragmentary texts and other minor texts that are coming out, which are given even more exposition as to who Enoch was and the work that he did, and elaborating on the focus of the Watchers and their interdiction into the affairs of humanity, which is a very important part of Scripture and the biblical timeline, because the fallen angels, the creation of the giants, um, and the wars between the giants and Israel, because that's something that is covered in great detail even within Scripture, but it's not even spoken about other than David and Goliath by the mainstream community. And these kind of things are so very important because they show to us and affirm that things like evolution are a lie, and that the whole thing that we evolved of a monkey, all of that, it's just crazy. then that there's another race of beings here, 6-fingered, 6 toes, double sets of teeth, that have been and are still, because I don't know if you know about this, Gary, but I just picked up a book called The Solomon Island Mysteries, and it speaks about how there are giants even present in this day and age, and that um, that were met by the American military and the Japanese military during World War II, and that particularly in the Pacific Island area, and that there are stories amongst the natives even now of people that are abducted and that were kept by these particular race of giants within the interior of the mountains there. There's a story of a lady that was kept as a servant to one of these giant families, and she escaped years later and brought forth all of this. I mean, just sounds completely crazy, but these are the kind of things that are caught up in the oral traditions and shared amongst the Solomon Island peoples, the native peoples that live there. And these are some of the stories that are shared within this book, Solomon Island Mysteries, written by Marius Banyan. And so, I mean, just fascinating, incredible. And I'm sure you heard about the special forces encountering the Kandahar giant. And so, these kind of things are very much real, even though they sound fantastical, and there are confirmation of them, um, even in the stories of the conquistadors, going across and through here in America and South America, and how Magellan encountering in Patagonia these giants, and those kind of people are still said to be in the jungles in the Amazon forest. I mean, so um, fascinating stories, and the Bible comes to light as truth and is confirmed as truth with all of these accounts. Okay.
Yeah, and we don't know whether or not all of those accounts are true, but I don't think we can
Right.
dismiss them either.
Yes.
And certainly that Afghanistan one, if you listen to that interview that was on Coast to Coast with Steve Quayle and the pilot, I mean, absolutely stunning and interesting account with the details, and it's the details I was paying attention to, and I can't say that any of his details would have been wrong, from the red hair and the size and the dexterity and everything else that he was talking about. So,
Right.
and we have these, as you say, it's not just in recent years, it's all throughout history we have accounts of these giants, and we have the red-headed giants in North America and the red-headed ones in Peru, and on and on and on. It's just so much there to absolutely dismiss, and yet they're also kind of related to the end time, and we need to understand that. And that's why I think, referencing back to what we're talking about earlier, is why Enoch has been suppressed in so many things, because if you look at probably the most, I'll just backstep a couple steps here, but in Enoch, you're going to learn about these hollow places where
Right.
it's thought that a lot of these Nephilim live or are in stasis, and there's many different legends and things like that. But it talks about the hollow places in the underworld, and it also gives information that makes sense out of probably the most puzzling prophecy in the Bible, and that's Revelation 9 and the abyss and what comes out of the abyss, right?
Right.
If you don't understand the abyss, if you don't understand fallen angels and impassioned fallen angels and the creation of the giants, you don't understand the abyss. And so everybody apologizes away what all of these meanings are. And I think that John was describing exactly what he saw in the vision coming out. And
Yes.
it's these impassioned angels, and the worst of them, and these scorpion beings, are probably what the Sumerians depicted as the Girdabelu and the Krababalu, gods that were protectors of gods and created by Tiamat and protected the the temples after Tiamat was killed. Just my speculation, but there's a description, and I've got a post on that if anybody wants it. It's a fascinating read, and I give you pictures of reliefs, and there's no doubt in my mind that the weapons they use and the descriptions of them match perfectly with what comes out of the abyss. And so we learn about the abyss in great detail in Enoch, so we can better understand that. And what's important to understand about all of that is the topsy-turvy, incredible aspect of the supernatural of the end time and all of its horror is greater than we can imagine.
Right.
And Revelation 9 is the tip of that iceberg. And if you want to get prepared and not be deceived, you need to know this information. And
Absolutely.
So we learn all about the abyss, where it's located, the difference between, the shaft of the abyss and the prison. And I want to just match up, one verse just to give another parallel example. So in Isaiah 13, which is a prophecy that leads into the Isaiah 14 prophecy and details of prehistory that we talked in detail about last night. 13:5, it says, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even
Right.
the Lord, and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. And it's also part of these beings even coming from God that's talked about in Isaiah 13 as well. And so if you look what it says in the book of Enoch, that's what it says where the abyss is located, that it's located at the far end of the heaven and earth in chapter 18. And this is the deep abyss with the columns, and it's the prison that the impassioned angels are hung in. And these are the beings that I think that are coming out that are going to impact the end time, along with all of the angels that are thrown out of heaven at the midpoint of the last 3.5 years. So we are going to have Nephilim descendants. We are going to have rebellious fallen angels. We are going to have creatures and beasts like we've not seen before. And we've got the demon spirits that are looking and thirsting for bodies and also interacting in Revelation, causing the wars and things like that. And the relationship with Babylon and at Armageddon with all of these different beings of beasts and howlings and things like that. If you don't understand the supernatural aspect, it's hard to fully understand end time prophecy. And the book of Enoch gives you both the prehistory details and then gives you what's going to happen in the end time. And then you match that up with the Bible. And now you've got some understanding that is likely not to let you be deceived.
Absolutely. Yes. Job and Enoch, Isaiah speaks about this. I mean, and Joel, chapter 2, which we'll be right back for second hour and we'll elaborate a little bit. Be right back, everyone. Against Babylon. Lift up a standard on the mountain of the plain. Exalt the voice to them. Beckon with the hand. Open the gates, ye rulers. I give command, and I will bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting. A voice of many nations on the mountains, even like to that of many nations, a voice of kings and nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts has given command to a warlike nation to come from a land afar off, from the utmost foundation of heaven. The Lord and his warriors are coming to destroy all the world. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is near, and destruction from God shall arrive. And that's the Brenton Septuagint translation of Isaiah chapter 13, verses 1 through 6. Gary? Gary, you there, brother?
When you start reading in Isaiah and Jeremiah about all of this wrath and supernatural destruction, and you've got dragons and howling beasts and satyrs and everything that's involved in some of these prophecies. It's very, very important that people go back to prehistory to understand prophecy, because you need to understand these stuff in the context, because what has happened before is going to happen again.
Yes.
And it's all going to come about in a significantly quick sort of manners for people. And so I think it's just so important to read prophecy in that sort of context. And when I talked about the crab, I always struggle with that there. Crab, Umalu, and the Girdalbaloo out of Sumerian mythology, that's in the Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh. And here's the description. They are described as large beings with the head, torso, and arms of a man, the body of a scorpion, avian legs or bird legs, and wings that launch powerful destructive weaponry depicted as some form of arrows from bows, and stinging their prey from a venomous. And you see the pictures of them in the reliefs, and then you match that up with Revelation 9, you quickly understand it's probably these are the protectors of the gods that are coming with them as part of that supernatural army that you were talking about. And a crab goes back to the Hebrew 6137, which is for scorpion and or scourge, which is what these things do. And a crab is also in Chaldean for scorpion as well, and is called the oppressors of the gods, as I had mentioned. And then if you go to, as you were mentioning just before, you read about this army in Joel 1 and 2. And this is not the Armageddon army at this point in time, because the Armageddon war was going to follow in Joel 3 and 4. But yet in Joel 1 and 2, you're also going to get mentions of mighty men, as well as these scorpion-like beings that match up very well with the beings that are in Revelation 9. And I also think this is the same war as Ezekiel 38 and 39, because again, you get these mighty men mentioned in chapter 39, and we know this is an end time battle as opposed to the 1,000-year one, because it happens in the latter days, is what it says in Ezekiel. And in chapter 39, it also has a reference to the second Exodus. So we know it has an end time application. And you also have these travelers, as some translations like to describe it. And these travelers are thought to be the ones that go back between the dimensions, like the Rephaim did, which it would be connected to the mighty ones. So when I look at all of that, that is before the abomination and before the wrath bowls. And if it's that bad, just think how bad and how big the army is going to be for Armageddon. And it has to be a war. It has to be a war of that size, because Antichrist needs to come in and convince the world that he's the Messiah and he's going to bring peace. And so he's got to have an Armageddon type war, as Jesus does, to properly fulfill his Antichrist credentials.
Right, absolutely. And and as far as the ancient aliens and how they are setting up the whole premise of the return of the fallen angels, or the Anunnaki, and how the whole thing that they're coming to save us from ourselves, the Mayan prophecies, we see a setup for a supernatural, an alien god, a false savior Messiah being established. And the Ancient Aliens show is like #1 in the world. And so many people, especially if they're not well versed in the esoteric aspects of the scriptures and those things that we're speaking about here, they don't understand the truth of the gospel and how these kind of things are revealed. And because these things aren't being taught in most of the mainstream churches, they are leaving those places and leaving those kind of pastors, and they're going to seek answer in other direction. And a lot of people are embracing the theology, because this is like a religion that is being put forth, the whole ancient alien. I mean, all those guys that come on there, they talk about, the extraterrestrials. They are the angels, or they are our gods, or they are our creators. The whole thing. They jumped the gun on evolution and created humanity, modern humanity, so long ago. And so the whole premise is being established for the Antichrist to come and to take over and to be given this authority, and he already has all this appeal from the mythology and the traditions that, as far as the feathered serpent, all of that also ties into this. And so this whole thing, the strong delusion, or part of it, has been established, and I believe a lot of the world is ripe for just ready to bow down to these creator beings, or so-called creator beings. Thoughts on that, Gary?
Oh, I think that's exactly what's going to be happening, and it's part of that alien deception. So, and I think the alien mythos has some credibility to it in terms of certain aspects. And I like their research. Their bias is obviously not my bias.
Right.
So they're going to devalue the fallen angels or the gods to just a very advanced form of alien. But that doesn't mean there aren't other types of aliens, right? Or beings, and perhaps ones that also survived, if we can go with these positions of places in the earth, or if they had technology to be off the earth during the flood. And so you've got like the gray aliens and all these little beings that sort of match up with the fairies, and particularly the gray neighbors with the grays in terms of the flying machines. And you've got the reptilian aliens that sort of match up to Nakash and or Nephilim descendants, and I'm not sure how that interplays, but they can use a variety of beings to do this deception, as well as we understand that in the physical world that you have fallen angels who have shape-shifting capabilities, so they can take any form that they want. So,
right.
And then you've got this Anunnaki coming back, which is really the gods and part of the angelic realm that everybody talks about communicating with the governments today. So I think that is a distinct likelihood, and I think when we see the war in heaven in Revelation 12 and what Antichrist does to bring, as in Daniel, some of the starry host down, I think that's going to be like a Star Wars type war. We're going to think that we're just part of this greater universe fighting for our freedom. That's what they're going to tell people if they that will fall for it, just like in Star Wars. So yeah, I guess the simple answer is I agree with that 100%. It's part of that great delusion. And I should mention that, and because I didn't mention earlier where I got that passenger or traveler aspect of Ezekiel. That's 39:11 if people want to double check that. And the word in the King James Bible is passengers, but in other translations it'll say travelers. But if you take that back to Hebrew, that's the word abar 5674, and that means to cross over. And so if you start drilling back on that word and some of the history and the Ugaritic texts, and you'll find that there's a connection there of these travelers that cross over from the spirit world with the Rephaim. So I think there's a connection there, and it just seems to fit with all the other supernatural things going on in these different beings that were part of the prehistory.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I would remind people also that With regard to the shape-shifting capacities, that in Second Corinthians it tells us that in verse 14, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. And so, the Bible tells us that they can shapeshift. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. And so, the Bible declares that they have this particular capacity. We see it made mention of in, like we had quoted from passages from the Emerald Tablets in the show that we did last night. And there are all of these conic, dragon-like, serpentine, seraphic imagery and connections to these particular fallen angelic, what we know to be as demonic entities, legion, the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness, wickedness in high places, but most of the world believes that they, are extraterrestrials from way far wherever. But certainly they are interdimensional beings, and that is spoken about in great detail in different places as well. And with regard to the locust army, we see in Isaiah chapter 14, and one of the things that is of great interest to me, and which I wrote about in great detail in my last book, Paradise, the Sides of the North, and the Mount of the Congregation, that where it speaks about how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Where he says, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I believe I have decrypted where the sides of the north and the mount of the congregation are located. And I do believe that this is associated with the North Pole and with the particular feature. The Mount of the Congregation, I believe, is also associated to what Mount Meru in the Vedic cosmology, or Mount Olympus in the Greek cosmology. Um, that this particular mountain at the center of the plane of the earth, that this is where the Mount of the Congregation is, and that the sides of the north are representative of Polaris, where Polaris is the fixed star, the one fixed star of the celestial evening. It shows us where the throne of the Most High God has been established in the very center of the vaulted dome of the earth. And it is also my opinion that the abysmal chasm is located there as well, and that where it continues, yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. I do believe that the abysmal chasm is referenced as well as being located there at the north, and that we see um, a link to Jacob's ladder, that the gateway, the portals to the Most High's throne, and also to the interior Sheol, are located in this particular area. And we see both Job in chapter 26 and also um, Enoch in chapter 18. They speak about this, and I'll read really quickly what it says in the King James. Dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. This particular area is mentioned in several different places. Um, Enoch also, as I said, speaks about it, and there's a passage in the Chronicles of Jeremiah that says, there the demons, the earthquakes, evil spirits, and Shittim dwell, and from there they come forth to the world. As it is said, out of the north evil shall break forth. Um, and so I'll share one other passage which talks about this, and it's an interesting passage. It's from the Cave of Treasures, and also the book of the bee, and it speaks about the giants being gathered and confined in the interior of the earth, at this particular north, this place in the north. And it says, and shut them up within the confines of the north. This is the gate of the world on the north, and there is no other entrance or exit from the confines of the world, from the east to the north. And it also says that at the end of days, that they will be released from this particular area, and that the giants and the locust army, all of that, these supernatural, just as I read with Isaiah, these giants being released, and that they will come and be part of the wrath, uh, being poured out on the wicked. Just one further comment here. It says, on account of the assured tranquility and certain peace, same thing as Paul references, that peace comes sudden destruction. Suddenly the gates of the north shall be open, and the hosts of the nations that are imprisoned there shall go forth. The whole earth shall tremble before them, and men shall flee and take refuge in the mountains and in the caves and burial places and in the clefts of the earth. And they shall die of hunger, and there will be none to bury them, by reason of the multitude of the afflictions which they will make men suffer. They will eat the flesh of men, and drink the blood of animals. They will devour the creeping things of the earth, and hunt for serpents and scorpions and reptiles that shoot out venom, and eat them. They will eat dead dogs and cats and abortions of women with the afterbirth, and they will give mothers the bodies of their children to cook, and they will eat them before them without shame. They will destroy the earth, and there will be none able to stand before them. And, this goes right along with Joel chapter 2, the supernatural armies, and even, the whole thing of the mention of that the earth will be destroyed, before them a Garden of Eden, and then after them destroyed wilderness. And so I think you're definitely right on with all these connections, Gary.
Yeah, and you said a lot in there, so I want to touch on
Right.
some of the stuff as my memory recalls them, because there's so many interesting sort of points there. So, and you're talking about these mountains, and typically in prehistory, there's these 7 sacred mountains, and one is in the center of the earth.
Right.
But there are 7 around the world, and so we're not sure where all of those 7 are, but the north is always sort of mentioned in the ways that you were talking about. And also the armies that are coming, that are these supernatural armies, whether or not it is in the Joel War or mentioned in Gog, they're coming from the north. Or the destruction of Babylon, that army comes from the north in the end time. And when in Daniel, the Antichrist looks to the north, and there's something there like an army coming, and he goes to meet them. Out of the tends to come all these supernatural armies, I think. I mean, as I connect the dots on it. So it makes some sense there that if you think that shaft to the end of the earth, as we talked about in Isaiah and in Enoch, is where the abyss is located, then that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And another thing that you were touching on is that you were talking about the word watcher again, and we touched on that last night, and that's another word that people have in Greek called Grigori, which matches up to watcher, and we see that in Daniel 4, where the term watcher comes up. That's a type of angel, and what's interesting about that word and the reptilian and the god and the seraphim connections that you were talking about, if we go into Egypt with the Urshu gods, that translates as watchers and intermediaries, or the Neteru or Neter gods are the ones who watch.
Yes.
And over in Greek, when you have Drakon and Drakonta, which, again, the Olympian gods were essentially those were reptilian gods, as they're originally depicted, also means to watch. And so we have all of these connections that, again, sort of go global wide, that have a similar type of meaning that you can't ignore. You just have to look at what you're being told and just let the pieces fall together and not be concerned if it's a bit disturbing, because it's supposed to be disturbing. So I think all of these connections that you're talking about and the supernatural nature that we've been talking about is why, if you want to understand that you have to understand First Enoch and some of the other context that you get out of the other books of Enoch.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, again, I think it's very important for the world to, and especially the seekers seekers of truth, to open themselves and embrace these possibilities. Because even Yeshua spoke about in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, when the apostles asked him about these signs of the end and about the things that would be occurring in the world when he returned and when he would be coming for second advent. He said, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the second coming of the Son of Man, that as they were marrying and giving in marriage, just like everything was just normal and natural, and then the flood came upon the world, the same thing would be going on in this day and age with us being the fig tree generation, and that everything would seem normal. And as Paul says, then peace comes sudden destruction, and that then, like a thief in the night, he would return. And so, in my opinion, we are seeing indications of that with regard to as in the days of Noah. And it's very important that we understand that the connotations that Christ is alluding to is the connections to the giants and the fallen angels and all that occurred that led up to the flood of Noah's day. That really the flood was brought upon the world not because of necessarily just the wickedness of humanity, but because of the presence of the giants here upon the earth, and that they were cannibals and they were feeding on and feasting on the flesh of humanity and decimating humanity in such manner. In Baruch, the second book of Baruch, it makes mention of that the flood wiped out 409,000 giants. And so, each one of these giants was said to be capable of incredible feats of strength and also superior in their warlike nature and able to slaughter just, huge amounts of not just men, but they, even Goliath, he was said to be the Philistine champion and able to challenge and to take up and defeat anybody, and nobody would even uh, take him up on his challenge until David, anointed by the Most High, slew Goliath and took his head. But the warlike nature of these giants, the Og, mentioned in the Bible, how big he was. I mean, we can only imagine 409,000 giants running around on the earth and at war with humanity. It would take a flood in order to restore peace and bring up what would be left of the 8 members of the family of Noah and give them a chance to reestablish. We'll be right back for our final segment, everyone. That belonged to earth's youth. Wise were we with the wisdom of the children of light who dwelt among us. Strong were we with the power drawn from the eternal fire. all of these greatest among the children of men was my father, thought me, the keeper of the great temple, and link between the children of light who dwelt within the temple and the races of men who inhabited the 10 islands. This is from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and it's speaking about the uh, Thoth, who was an Atlantean priest king. And he speaks about these ancient times and these ancient days and how they were different from the pre Adamic peoples that they had attempted to enslave and to alter to make as a servant class. And I think that that, in my opinion, was one of the reasons why the Most High God had created modern humanity in their own image and to bring us upon the earth, because it would be through us that not only would Christ be born as one of the children of Adam and bring salvation to world, but also condemnation to the fallen ones for all that they were doing in trying to enslave even the pre-Adamic peoples and for the evil that they unleashed upon the world. Gary, do you have comment on that? And then we'll move into what will be the final segment of the show this evening. It's going about that.
Yeah, I think we have to be open to the fact that before the Adamites and likely the people of day 6, that there were beings before that and or at the same time of the people of day 6, and that they were not good to the human-like people, and certainly to the Adamites
Right.
that followed. So I think that's a distinct possibility, and I do think that we can make a case that between the Eden account and day 6, that the details are so significantly different that they have to be two different accounts, in my opinion. And I
Right.
know a lot of people will disagree with that. But if you go point by point, and I have a handout if somebody wants on the differences on that, just get a hold of me and I'll send it to you. There are just way too many to try and rationalize away. They're two different stories. So I think that's been around all of the time. And if you look at the Watchers and these types of beasts, that these other beings, whether or not they're reptilian-like or the Nakash type, because the Nakash was an intelligent being before Eden, and was considered a kingly being in the other religions and mythologies, and was an intelligent being that could speak, that this may have been that race that they were talking about. And it would make sense why the Nakash would want to help with Satan to bring down the Adamites, because there are two different types of people. Now, how they're created is a whole different ballgame, but that makes sense to me, that there's like another connection there. And when I was also thinking that in what you were talking about before the break, as in the days of Noah, and we have to remember that in the days of Noah, that Noah lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood, which is important because you have giants after the flood as well.
Right.
And you have Babel after the flood, and you have Sodom and Gomorrah, and all of that is reflected in end time prophecy and allegory. And that's why we need to consider after the flood as well. And then before, I agree that with what you had said, that God was really forced to start anew and wipe everything out, because the corruption was more than just the violence, right? That we read about in 6:11 and 6:12. And if you take back to Hebrew, you get a better understanding what it means when it says the whole world was corrupt. That means basically decayed, destroyed, ruined, spoiled,
Yes.
perverted. And I think that means not only with the Nephilim, but with all these other beasts that were created, and how many other animals were distorted through DNA manipulation or crossbreeding with all of these other perverted types of creations that are recorded in other religions and mythologies. And I also think that the genome of the plant world was changed.
Right.
completely as well, just as what we're doing today. And if we look at what we're doing today, and we see the technology and the things we can do today, and we look at the corruption that is being talked about that would actually bring about a flood, that means that their technology and capability had to be, in my opinion, greater than what we have today, because we're not quite in the end time yet, and our knowledge and technology is still advancing. So I look at all of this as, when it says the whole world is corrupt, I think we need to take that at face value, that everything was corrupted. And I also think that's one of the reasons why God leads the animals that are going to go on the ark as representatives of the species, because that's what kind stands for in the Bible in terms of how it's used, a representative of the species to go on the ark, because he knew the ones that were corrupted.
Right.
And probably is at least a form that he wanted to survive after the flood, to repopulate the earth along with the 8 humans that are also not corrupted with Nephilim DNA or bloodlines. And that's my position. I know there's other positions that say that the wives had DNA from the giants. I don't think so, but I recognize that that's a possibility, because giants do show up after the flood, and they bring about the same sort of horrors that were going about before the flood, but they never seem to populate to the same degree as what Baruch tells us. You got 409,000 giants, and we don't even know whether or not that was the peak of the population, right? So they didn't seem to be able to procreate the same way after the flood, and to gain those numbers, but they still had enough power and authority to totally take over the kingship dynasties, and thus have all of humankind following them. So they still had a big impact, and that impact has rolled forward to this day, and it's those descendants matched up with whatever's coming out of the abyss and other dimensions in the end time that are partnering together to bring about all of this supernatural stuff in the end time. And I think that's also one of the reasons why they're trying to get at CERN. They want to unlock the key to the abyss. Whether or not they can actually do it or not, that's a whole different question, but I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I fully agree that there's something to even, with what it talks about in the Emerald Tablets again, where they call up great evil from the deep below, and these interdimensional beings, that it's a repeat, nothing new under the sun. And we see that the same thing, as in the days of Noah, again, that this technology is being recreated. And it's not something that's new. That I agree with you that they had very much advanced, they brought the mysteries of heaven. They had very advanced technologies previous to the flood of Noah's day, and even during the time of the destruction of Atlantis, and the prior times during all of that, where their cultures and civilizations were destroyed, as is elaborated upon also in the Emerald Tablets. And the Scroll of Thotis in the Colburn Bible speaks about that in great detail. I shared that with you as well. But yes, these prior cultures and civilizations, I mean, even the fact that the megalithic structures and the colossal cyclopean blocks that they use to create these cultures, they are still in existence today, and that we see remnants of their capacity. And there's no way, even with the so-called high technology of modern age, that cranes can even lift one of these blocks. And to actually lift and put them in place with other, I mean, those kind of things are a capacity that is long lost, and not not something that we can repeat. repeat in this day and age, and show that in and of itself shows that they had a greater capacity and a higher technology and a greater advancement. And in my opinion, we've been degrading since those times, and that the Most High has brought judgment every time this New World Order. In the books of Plato, it talks about how the Atlanteans were trying to establish world dominance even during that time, and we see that even during Nimrod's time in the Tower of Babel, when he establishes this world order and puts everybody to work and has them all united in effort, that the Most High scattered them and split them apart and separated them in tongue and tribe. And so I believe that that's also a repeat of judgments that he has brought upon the fallen ones in uniting the world in previous times and previous epochs. And that every time he has had to bring judgment upon them is for, they're trying to unite world in technology and capacity and ability and effort. And we see that he's not a fan of a one world order. And certainly at the end of days that they are able to assert this beast system and the 10 toes, and to unite the world for the reign of the coming of the Antichrist. But that will all be for short time, and then part of the end of days and the wrath of God being poured out. Comment, Gary?
Yeah, I like to refer to the New World Order, or the NWO, as the Nephilim World Order, and
Yes.
that beast, beast kingdom will be definitely a Nephilim world order of 10 kings, or at least half of them anyways. I was thinking about that, and what we're talking about, the abyss, and I brought up CERN, and thought maybe the audience might be interested in a couple interesting connections, which is why you need to understand all of this. So if you go to CERN, that is not named coincidentally, and it's not an acronym of any sort. There's actually a god in Druidic pantheon, that's called Cernunnos, and there's also an Etruscan god called CERN, and this is a Pan-like god. This is an Azazel type god. This is a Baphomet type god. This is what we would understand as a satyr out of the Bible. And so this has a connection that we need to dig into, because if you look at where CERN is located at Saint Genis Puy, the Puy goes back to Roman times, and from the Latin Apolliacum, that the Romans called that place. And that is the Greek Apollyon, where there was a temple dedicated to Apollyon there. And so this whole idea that any of that is coincidental, that imagery with what their true ambitions are, people need to think twice about that. Whether or not they can actually open the abyss or not. We know it's going to be open, but typically if we look at Revelation, it's a star that's sent from God. Whether or not it's a falling star and a fallen angel that opens it, that's a whole different ballgame. Or that's actually Azazel that's released, as in some versions at Orion, where he's said to be chained up down to the abyss, but also Enoch says he's also in the abyss as well. So I think he's in the abyss with the rest of the angels. But now if we look at what it talks about Antichrist as the son of perdition, perdition is comes from the Greek apollia, G684, and it's rooted in G622, which is Apollume, I recall, and 622 is also rooted in Apollyon for destroyer. And what's important to understand about all of that, just as 623 is related to it as well, as destroyer, as Satan, and all of these words as 625, you get sort of clusters of words in Greek and in Hebrew at times that all give a further meaning as you drill back on that etymology. But when we read in Revelations that the Antichrist is the one who once was, now is not, but will be again, and is the one who comes up out of the abyss, and we understand that that's Abaddon and or Apollyon, which is likely Azazel, which is the leader of the angels coming out of the abyss. If that's not enough for you to think twice about why you need to read Enoch and understand prehistory, to understand what prophecy is talking about, I don't know what is.
Right. Yeah, I fully agree with you, and that's why I implore people to do just that. And even though both you and I, we talk about these things and bring forth these concepts, and try to help people to bridge the gap as far as understanding the underlying truth, uh, between the Bible and the ancient mysteries and the ancient traditions and ancient discoveries of the world. There's nothing like studying these things for yourself and reading them for yourself. And it's in doing so, in my opinion, that the Holy Spirit gives you discernment and helps you to come to understanding on these things, because they are affecting us. And as we said, the strong delusion is being established, and those that have no love of the truth, they are the ones that are fallen away, and also that get caught up and led astray. It says that even the very elect could be deceived if possible. And so, I think this is, even though so many people believe it's nonsensical or not important, it could be the most important thing to really to come to knowledge on in these last days with what we are facing and about to face. Gary?
Yeah, and again, I kind of cringe everybody when people start to say that these scorpion beings are helicopters and things like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
you just have to read Joel and read Revelation 9, and you don't have to apologize for what the Bible says. You just need to, understand prehistory. And there's lots of examples of these scorpion beings in prehistory. I mean, you have, in Egypt, you have Serket, which was the scorpion goddess of fertility and medicine and magic and venomous bites, right? And she's depicted with a scorpion on her head and holding an ankh. And, she was the patron protection for pharaohs and the first two rulers of Upper Egypt. And that's where that Scorpion King 1 and 2 in the legends and movies sort of come from. And also was a protector that was from Apep, the snake god, to protect the kings. And you also have 7 scorpions of Isis that protected Isis and Horus after Isis was killed in Greek mythology. So when I talk that these were the oppressors of the gods and the protectors of the gods, it depends on which gods are being attacked by them. These are very, very powerful beings. And in Mesopotamia, you have the Ishahara, which was the mother of the 7 Sabeti gods and Sabeti priests, or would be similar to the companions of Horus or the Sebtiu, or the 7 sages of India, as you follow the same sort of terminology in other religions. And these Sabeti are the ones that also produce the survivors that help civilization after the flood in terms of how they view survival after the flood. And you also have scorpion gods that are in the Quiché Maya and Aztec history, and the names are way beyond my ability to pronounce when they get beyond about 12 or 15 letters. But they were kind of they are sky gods that no, they were scorpion gods that threatened to destroy the earth, and so they had to be destroyed. And they got their punishment or imprisonment because they destroyed the sacred grove of fruit trees, and they have arms and tails of scorpions. So this is not an unknown concept that we have to apologize for what the Bible says. We just need to trust in what it says. And Enoch is going to help you with that.
Yes, absolutely. Um, there's even, traditions from the, like Krita Mutwa, he talks of very strange beings. And I'll just share a couple passages. He says, we had to worship them and accept them as our creators. Some told our people that they were our elder brothers and that this earth had produced them generations ago. Creatures of an extremely frightening and hideously ugly appearance. Some say that these creatures were like crocodiles with crocodile like teeth and jaws, but with very large heads. Some say that these creatures are very tall beings with snake like heads set on long, thin necks, very long arms, and very long legs. There are those that tell us that these gods who came from the skies traveled through the land in magical boats and made of bright metal, silver, or copper and gold, and they had the ability to change their shapes at will. They were amphibian, reptilian, sky gods. And so, all these things, even the traditions of the oral people, and as you had mentioned with the Chinese and the Japanese, the Korean, they speak about the dragon people and how they had established even the kings, the royal races that sit on the thrones of the world even now in this day and age. And so, I mean, these kind of things are still with us. And unless you really come to understand and embrace the discernment that we're sharing with you, you can't make sense of all of these loose connections or understanding underlying truth and the profundity of all of this information for us as being the last generation, because it is during our time that we will see the return of the Antichrist and the unveiling of the beast system. I believe, in my opinion, that all these things are soon to happen. Even, I mean, it could be any day, in my opinion. Comment, Gary? Also, we've got
Well, I think there's still
about
some
4
things.
minutes, just so you know.
Okay. I think there's a few things that need to come together, but they can come together very quickly with some cataclysms. So I think we're close,
Right.
but I try not to get caught that we're in the last 7 years or anything like that, or trying to set
Right.
dates.
Yeah.
There's still some pieces to come together because we need a universal religion. There has to be the
Yes.
ability to do the sacrifice on a wing of the temple, and there needs to be a world government. So those things, but they can come together with cataclysms. When you're talking about those crocodiles, I just went to chapter 12, verse 1 of the Slavonic Book of Enoch, which is Second Enoch, and in the Slavonic version as opposed to the Greek version of it that you mentioned earlier. But it says, and I looked and I saw other flying elements of the sun whose names are phoenixes, caldri, marvelous and wonderful, with feet and tails in the form of a lion and a crocodile's head.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
just thought, I wonder whether or not those other beings might be the offspring of whatever these types of beings are. I
Right.
mean, the phoenixes aren't really described in Enoch what they look like, but the caldri are certainly described in Third Enoch if people want to look that up. But they all have specific sort of looks to them, different types of wings, and have different positions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, very fascinating. We appreciate you so much, brother, and I look forward. Gary will be joining us again next Thursday, so definitely catch us here on TFR. But once more, give out your website, your contact information, and where people can go to find and read your books and support your work.
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me, if you do want to get a hold of me, is through Facebook under Gary Wayne and or the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And you post a question there, I will get back to you, or message me there, or on Twitter, the same thing. You can follow what I'm doing on a weekly basis in terms of putting new information that I think is out there that people haven't looked at, and hopefully you get a flavor for some of that I was presenting tonight. And if you're interested in getting hold of me through my website, you can also look on there for a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters, and you can email me through there. And that is the Genesis6conspiracy.com, Genesis6conspiracy.com with the number 6. And you can also link into Amazon and Kindle and Barnes & Noble from there, or you can also order a signed copy if you want to get a signed copy. So all of that is available to you. And if somebody was, just as a reminder, they wanted some of the documents that I was talking about tonight, just get a hold of me and I will email that out to you.
We appreciate you so much. 3,080 listeners live. So we appreciate all of you as well. And thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. And like I said, Gary will be on with us again next Thursday. And I will be releasing in video form very soon the show that we did last evening. God bless you, Gary. God bless all. Good night. Shalom.